Good morning, welcome to ChamberLIVE. Today's is From Nourish to Flourish, connecting financial and mental wellness. And we've got Neil Welsh from PM&M and Catherine Dobson from CD Psychology talking us through today's topic. The views expressed in this webinar don't necessarily represent the views of the Chamber of Commerce, and all facts were believed to be correct at the time of recording, which is the 3rd of June 2020. Now, time to meet our guest speakers, Neil and Catherine. Neil Welsh has 33 years financial services experience from branch banking to independent financial advisor, the last 4 years of which with PM&M. His own journey has given him the belief that financial health, mental health and physical health are all linked, and he's passionate and very open in helping others avoid the repeat of some of his experiences. Also, Catherine Dobson with us this morning. She's a chartered psychologist with over 30 years experience of working with the NHS. She's a consultant on the Occupational Health and Safety Register also. She's a keen adventurer, having sailed through UK coastal waters and the Mediterranean. She established CD Psychology in 2010 and recently trained as a strength scope team practitioner. She's currently working with small businesses, helping to promote psychological safety in the workplace and focusing on why strengths are good for your well-being and for your business. That's today's ChamberLIVE, and time for me to hand over to our guest speakers. Over to you guys.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So yeah, I'll screen share in a second. We've got some of my slides initially and then Catherine's thereafter. Catherine and I have encountered each other repeatedly over the last few years and have been increasingly having discussions where it felt like we were coming from the same place, and some form of collaboration seemed obvious. So as a tiny bit of background, and you may have seen via my previous LinkedIn postings and various other things, battled anxiety and depression in the past. Have definitely, despite being a financial advisor, had my own financial traumas. Working in banking, into and throughout the banking crisis, and suffering a 50% drop in salary, definitely concentrated the mind and brought its problems. So although I tend to spend the majority of my days giving financial advice to people with lots of money, I also understand the importance of planning for those who either haven't got anything or don't quite understand what to do and where to start. Wealth management as a term is a pretty poor one, because it acts as a barrier to people accessing financial advice. And the reality is, if you've got an appetite and a capacity for planning a better future, then the doors are open. So with no further ado, let's crack on. So yeah, from Nourish to Flourish, from where we are to where we're going, I suppose, really. Let's hopefully see that moving on. Doesn't want to, yes it does. So yeah, PM&M, you should know who we are. 101-year-old this year, 120 people, I think, currently. Teams getting progressively bigger, dealing with pensions, investments, etc. on the wealth management side, as well as all the other accountancy stuff. So what we're looking to do today, or certainly on my slides, is helping you be in charge of your own finances, help program your own financial SatNav, and some planning considerations as well. In terms of putting you in charge of your finances, in fact, let's just go back slightly, because I think we should have a poll question that Simon has that he can fire in at this stage, just to make sure that you're all awake and paying attention. So, does financial planning intimidate you, excite you, or bore you? Yeah, so 64% intimidate, 18% excite, 18% bore. Yeah, bore is perhaps a little disappointing, but nonetheless, the intimidation is definitely a common theme, and hopefully a little bit of this will help. So let's just come back off that, if I can. Back onto there. Right, so in terms of putting you in charge of your finances and you know, restoring financial health or having better financial health, step one really is to understand what it is that you're spending your money on, and have control. Understand what your starting point is, and in lots of ways, doing a detailed expenditure summary is the best way to do that. I do have a template that I can share afterwards if anybody wants it as a way to do that. Because what the expenditure summary does is help identify where your money goes, where potentially you can save some, highlights where perhaps you're paying for expensive debt, and in effect highlights which bits you should be paying off first, what changes you can make. And at the same time, an asset summary also helps you understand what you've got in terms of money and whether you have a safety net. So again, at this point, I think we've got a second poll question, which Simon should be able to, or Jen should be able to fire up, which is, do you have a safety net? So do you have a financial safety net? No. Yes, between 0 and 3 months salary or its income equivalent, or yes, 3 months plus of salary or income equivalent.
Also, just to interject, I've anonymised all these survey questions, so you're not sharing anything with anyone other than with yourself.
Pretty common responses there. Yes, some people have got a safety net to fall back on, but it's definitely not a foregone conclusion. And there are lots of people who don't have, and that's not necessarily something to be uncomfortable about. It's certainly something that you can plan to move away from. So let's just exit that. So there's a little bit of financial health hints and tips. Divide by 5 is perhaps a slightly odd one, but if you paid monthly and you divide by 5, then on a 4-week month or a 4-weekend month, however you want to work it, you should have a little bit left. So it means that you give yourself a fighting chance of getting in front slightly. Obviously, the intention is if you get yourself in front, then stay there. Granny knew best. Well, I mean, everybody's granny is different, I suppose, but mine was definitely a jam jars and cardboard box kind of saver. So, you know, the Christmas money went in one jam jar and the holiday money went in something else. I don't propose you go out and start using jam jars, but you can certainly sort your finances with separate accounts. There are lots of things that if you look at an expenditure summary and a detailed expenditure summary that includes annual expenditure, you know, birthdays, Christmas budget, holidays, house maintenance costs, car servicing costs, tyres, MOTs, things like that. There are annual expenditure items that can sneak up on you if you're not ahead of the game. It sounds obvious, but understanding your borrowing interest and paying off the most expensive debt is the obvious thing to do where you can. Most overdraft borrowing now is charged at approximately 40% interest, and so on that basis you're paying an absolute arm and a leg out for keeping an overdraft. The rule of thirds is a bit of a personal mantra, but if you find yourself doing an income and expenditure summary and the expenditure summary indicates that you've got some surplus income, then divide by 3. Dividing by 3 means that you can spend a third, because let's be honest, you were doing anyway, save a third for short-term emergencies, and invest a third. Ask for help is something that I was reluctant to do in the past, but would encourage anybody to do. If things aren't going according to plan, then, you know, ask for help. There are the citizens' advice, you know, your own employers, me. Reach out. Don't face it alone. And obviously, at the moment in lockdown, the last item is perhaps slightly less relevant. But yeah, be cautious of contactless. Be cautious of small items of expenditure that you know, it's the marginal gains. They may be relatively minor individually, but collectively they mount up. I suppose the current danger is little bits of Amazon shopping. you know, the £5 a day here and there, if it's every day, can definitely rack up. Oops. Oh, spoiling my slides. So in terms of programming the SatNav, again, if you understand where you are, then there's also the where are you heading. And from a timeline planning perspective, when do you want to retire? How much do you need in retirement? You know, if you take the assumption that mortgage perhaps has finished, your commuting costs may have reduced, kids are no longer at home, then understanding what your future expenditure is likely to be is also key to knowing where you need to aim. What state pension will you get? So for those with pens and paper, if you write down BR19, BR19 is the old paper version of the state pension projection. You can do it online now, but the easiest search term is still BR19, and you can understand what state pension you will get. If you're on for a full state pension, which you will get with 35 years national insurance contributions, you'll end up with currently £8,800 a year, but clearly that's not necessarily going to meet all your expenditure. So the gap is what you need to plan for. You know, if you can imagine yourself on a beach in retirement, you know, close your eyes, you've got a drink in your hand, open your eyes again. Are you in Blackpool or are you in the Bahamas? Is it a can of Stella or is it a nice cocktail? Being specific about where you're aiming to go is quite key. So our marketing department quite like the idea of getting your destination Darwin slightly different. Bumps in the road or bends in the road, well, they're the bends, these are the bumps. You know, stuff gets in the way, house purchase, family, family's education, D-word, ill health, retirement. You know, they're all things that if you're not prepared for them or you're not mindful that they may occur, can derail you. And so again, it's a case of having a safety net in place and also accepting that you know, life isn't a straight road and that you do need to work with it. From a planning perspective, as financial advisors, what we look at using is the most tax efficient investments. But all of these items on the current slide end up linking in together, because depending on what your time frame is, you may be planning for a house purchase or for something in the next 5-10 years. Alternatively, you may be planning for retirement. So the appropriate investment vehicle could end up being different. Most people's ideas of pensions is that that's your income in retirement, but of course the pension freedoms that came in within recent years means that people are now increasingly accessing some of the pension money at age 55 onwards, and it's no longer a case of buying an annuity and having a fixed and stable income. What you can do with your money now varies tremendously. How that money is invested varies tremendously, and that's based on your attitude to risk, whether you're cautious, whether you're adventurous, what your capacity for loss is, i.e. can you tolerate some fluctuation in value, and I'll come back to that in a second. How your money is invested links into your attitude to risk in the asset allocation, because the more adventurous you are, typically the more shares you would have. The more cautious you are, the more fixed interest, gilts, bonds and cash you would have. But then equally you can invest into commercial property as well. So we've got Adam Bromley on the call from Forbes. Adam specialises in commercial property within pension funds, SIPP and SAS, etc. Inflation will erode the value of your money if you're not careful, which again I'll come back to in a minute. And then cash flow modelling is something that we do that help you project different scenarios, different what ifs going forward. And by tweaking the inputs, the output can end up looking very, very different. It's often referred to as accumulation and decumulation in terms of how you build money and then how you spend money. So in terms of what pots you fill first, what the batting order is, then you need your emergency cash in the first instance. then from a tax efficiency point of view, pension would almost always come next, followed by ISA, followed by collective unwrapped investments, and then investment bonds. When you get to retirement and you're starting to spend your money, in effect, you just reverse that. And although it sounds counterintuitive because we've been programmed to believe that pensions are what provide your income in retirement, in some ways you're better off using your other money before you get to pension because of their tax efficiencies. But that's pretty much beyond the scope of this short presentation. A little bit of past performance just to highlight fluctuation and volatility. The light blue line is a higher risk investment. The red line is a lower risk investment. So in effect, however you invest money, it will fluctuate in value, provided it's not held in cash, but it's a dampened level of volatility the more cautious you go. We can see on there various points some fairly significant dips. I've not updated this with the recent downturn, but we can see the dot-com bubble bursting in '99. We can see Gulf War. We can see banking crisis. We can see Brexit vote, and a whole host of things that were, big news at the time, but relatively quickly recovered from. And I think the reassuring factor there is that I've not needed to put the current situation on there because that too will be bounced back from relatively quickly. Whether it's a V-shaped recovery or a U-shaped recovery, who knows, but recovery there will be. Again, something there, the red line is the rate of inflation levelled off. So, £10,000 sat on the bed 10 years ago will still be £10,000 today. But what you could have bought with it 10 years ago might be costing you £12,000 or £13,000 today. So inflation's a bit of a sound assassin. The blue line is money sat in a decent bank account. So a bank account has failed to beat inflation. The green line is a commercial property index. So whilst property can outperform inflation, it doesn't always. And the orange line is a mixed balance, middle of the road investment portfolio. Yes, it fluctuates, but over time it outperforms inflation. So in terms of next steps, think about where you are now, think about where you're heading and are you on track, and can you get there on your own. I think we're in a very, very strong and fortunate position at the moment in that we're transitioning out of, however you want to describe, old normal into new normal. So we've got a chance to choose which bits we take into new normal, and our financial planning and financial health is a key aspect of that. And so again, at this point, I think, Simon, there's another poll question that you've got.
There it is.
There we go. So yeah, question, what will your finances look like post-COVID-19? So whether it's because of actions that you're taking or you plan to take, you think they'll be better, worse, or the same? Right, so again, probably not surprising. It's a fairly even split there. And I'm certainly not being dismissive of the fact that, yeah, for lots of people, it will look worse in the short term, but then there is still an opportunity to bounce back from this strongly. And so, yeah, in a fairly simple way, hopefully those slides have helped. If we can be of any assistance at PM&M, there are more attractive and younger financial advisors than I who can provide help and assistance. So Laura and Tara would be well worth talking to. So I don't propose to answer any questions at this point, but we'll go straight in to Catherine's slides, and then we can mop up anything thereafter. So Catherine, we're in your safe hands.
Thank you, Neil. So the presentation I'm doing is about taking on the themes really that Neil introduced, which were about how we move from now to the next, and also and what I'm proposing is we move through something that I'm calling energizing and strengths, and I'll talk a lot more about that later. For the moment, for the first, What I did during May was a survey. Some of you may have come across this, and it was looking at how are you feeling? How are you feeling at that time? And also in the next few months, and also for the future. So if you just look at the how were people feeling during May, there was some indication that most people were just managing, getting by. If you think back to how things were during May, people were on the whole saying they're just managing. Some people feeling that they were flourishing in their circumstances, and also a reasonable number of people feeling stressed about how things were for them. So move on to the next. And so this time next is to do with what is happening more or less now, in fact, between now and it was left as a loose time frame now and the next couple of months, where we're transitioning from a tighter lockdown to a more looser arrangement, which was unknown. We still don't quite know how that's going to pan out. So, so here we can see that there are there is a kind of wider range of people who are expecting that they're going to be themselves, their business like to be flourishing, but also a large number of people expecting to be stressed. And this is actually what I'm hearing from quite a lot of people as I talk to them about their situations, or listening to some of the networking discussions that the Chamber is really good at producing. So moving on to the next. Then for the future, now this is taking, say, 6 months hence, and what people were anticipating in this survey is more likely to be flourishing. So as people return to work, as people's circumstances begin to sort themselves out, there's likely to be a return to more high levels of flourishing and reduced stress. So we'll see how that pans out as things move on in the next few months. So the way I was phrasing those questions was a general view about well-being. So this, what I've done here, I'm breaking this down into more specific details. How do we understand well-being, and how, and some of these elements relate to things that Neil was talking about. So the first one is about physical health. Now, clearly that's been a really major aspect of what we've been considering in the last few months, and that is the real key focus of attention. And maybe that's unusual on the whole, but we know that physical health is a really important aspect of how that's affected our general well-being. Next. And mood and mental health is something that we will be aware of, but also that is what the government, interestingly enough, has really also paid attention to. And Neil has mentioned himself about how mood and mental health is affected by your circumstances on a day-to-day basis. Well-being, family relationships are clearly important, and most people have found that paying more attention to their family, being at home much more with a family, has actually made means that they have spent a lot more time with family than usual. There are many pluses and minuses of that as well. Social and work well-being is also about how you connect with other people. But social aspects maybe have reduced. We've also different ways of doing it. Work aspects have changed, and those, and certainly networking events such as put on by the Chamber and also other groups have really helped small businesses keep together. And it's whether or not within businesses people have been able to establish their connections between people who are working. But work, again, depends on the kind of work that you do and the way that people are continuing to connect together. Fulfillment, this is about how you feel and about your strengths, and I will come back to that. Next is business and career aspirations. Clearly, how you feel, your general well-being, is about kind of not just how you feel for the present, but actually how you might feel about the future. What are your intentions of the future, just as Neil was talking about? Financial intentions, what are they going to be? Control over decision making is a really important aspect of well-being, Neil referred to that in making decisions about finances, and I think that control of decision making is a really underviewed, underestimated part of well-being. And yet we've heard over the last few months about how important it is to make decisions we've had to make decisions so much more in ways that we probably aren't used to. So where do we go? When do we go out? Where do we do the shopping? How do we spend doing that? Who do we meet with? And so the control over day-to-day activities is different from usual. We've had to make decisions about our health as well, and decisions on behalf of our family in ways that we probably don't usually. And so this is quite an important aspect of the way we think about our well-being. So financial status, Neil has already referred to, and that is clearly quite an important area to pay attention to. So what I have here is a kind of a format which draws those things out into a way, draws aspects of well-being into a way which someone can fill out. And this is an example of one completed by someone only very recently, and she's given her permission to use this today. And we can see here that what this particular respondent has said is that for her, her family, her physical health is good, her family relationships are good, and for her financial status is fine. Perhaps that's slightly different from so that's one of the aspects that's important. But those, so for her, this was fine. What, as you can see from this, but there are aspects of her mood which are perhaps medium level. Her aspirations at the moment are somewhat mediocre, but she's also realised that her sense of fulfilment is limited, and of course, lies in common with many people, the way that she's connecting with people, friends, that is less than it would usually be, she would wish to have. And quite importantly, she runs a small business, and for her, control over decision making and day-to-day life decision making is really being constrained, and that has really had quite an impact on her, and that's the thing that's linked to her low mood. So what I think that this is a kind of model, it's an approach which people could consider for themselves. Where do you relate to on these model, on this kind of plan? And it's a sort of idea that people can take away to have a look at themselves, think how are you doing for yourself. It could be a model that people could use with their colleagues or with people they work with, as perhaps initiating a conversation about how you're doing, how you're feeling. When people, and in many cases, some people are returning to work from furlough, or there are changes in work circumstances, it may be an opener for perhaps not an opening conversation, but certainly a way in which people can consider, let's have a look. This is something you can have a look at. It just is a way of looking at how things are for you. If you want to know more about this, let me know. So just if you can go back, Neil, slightly, go back a second. Thank you. So on the fulfillment section, I referred to strengths and energizers. And for this particular person, she identified herself that one of the things she found was she felt limited. She wasn't able to do the things she wanted to do, and that was connected with how her control was being taken away. So strengths and energizers she found was low level. So if we can move on, next slide. Thank you. So what we have here is a tendency, although maybe not in necessarily the audience here today, but in quite a lot of people, there is a tendency to be somewhat negative in the problems, so that the problems, the energy drainers, the limiting thoughts outweigh the strengths and qualities that energize. And that was what was happening with that the example I've just shown you. So some of the things that's needed to change that balance is, how do you find things? How do you know? How do you reconnect with the things that energize you? What are the situations where you're working at your best? How do you know that what you're good at? How do you keep track of that? And how do you rebalance the time and attention you pay to that? So if we move on, the next slide, please. So down. So do you therefore take what's called the slightly negative side? Is your natural tendency to limiting your options by attending to threats and weaknesses? Now, of course, during the time that we've had of the last few months, we've had to pay an awful lot of attention to very real threats, very real impacts on ways of work, lifestyle, all sorts of things. And this, for a while, did create in a lot of people quite a lot of shock reactions, quite a lot of negative emotions, which are quite unfamiliar. And for many people, that meant we had to adopt the kinds of habits that were probably less familiar, but which are limiting. And so if we look about that in business terms, if there's a tendency to take a somewhat orient to merely the bottom line, but not pay attention to the wider the world or business opportunities, then the tendency would be that you'd limit the ways that you can develop your business. The other path, the path of possibility, is when you think more about your personal or strengths and ways of finding solutions to problems. This helps very quickly to generate much more engagement and energy, and as a result increases drive and opportunities. You think more broadly about the circumstances that you're in and naturally tend to become more energized. So we have next a poll, and that poll is about which is your path. Do you tend to take the path of limitation, or do you naturally tend to take the path of possibility? Vote now.
Just waiting on one more, Catherine, and then there we go.
Very good. So we have an interesting 80-20 split. So that's that certainly suggests a positive approach by the audience, and maybe reflects the fact that people are engaging in networking and meeting with others, and a part of a vibrant community of the Chamber of Commerce. But however, for a lot of people, and this is what I'm finding from that survey that I showed earlier, is that a lot of people are not necessarily finding that. And so it's important to be able to think towards keeping on top of your path. Now, whilst you as individuals also might be taking the green light, the green path, the path of possibility, it's possible that your colleagues may not, or even other members of your family may not. And so the important thing is, how do you take people with you? And what's really a key feature here is the real attention to noticing what your strengths are and how you use your strengths and how you work with others to create a trust, and how you create some opportunities. So here we just have a very quick overview of some of the ways of thinking about what are your strengths and energizers. There are a number of tools that look at this, and this particular one is called Strength Scope. And the idea is that there is an assessment, and that basically you identify whether or not the features of emotional thinking, relational execution are your part of the ways that you do things. So it's not so much about personality. It's about how you use the best opportunities that you can to do the things that work well. So we have a poll at the moment next, which is also helping you to think, suggest, just have a look, which is your key area of strength.
Give it 5 more seconds for the last couple to drop in. There we go, thank you.
Okay, very good. So here we can see there's people across all of them, and it's great that everyone has been able to respond. And so I'm sure you can work out how to begin to think about this, although in this format it's harder for me to get your views directly. So as you can see, the relational is the highest scoring, and that's about being with people, about making good relationships, about connecting with people, working with people, collaboration. And again, maybe reflects also the fact that you're being prepared to network on this kind of event. So your strengths are about working with others. The other areas are very important and clearly show it's important for the combination of those things to be working within a team. For an individual, again, depends on how you define your particular role or the ways that you really want to work. So what helps you work, it might well be that sometimes you need to build your strength. So going back to what we were talking about earlier with the case I showed you earlier, where the section on fulfillment was very low. So I talked with that lady about that one person about whether she was using, to what extent she was using or realized what her strengths were. And she found that she had just, for all sorts of reasons, things that are going on at the moment, these were just kind of put to the background because of attending to other matters. And I think that's one of the things that's happening at the moment, is that people have set aside their strengths, perhaps in view of making kind of, if you like, the greater good, working with others, making things work right, making sure people are working, are sorted, that maybe your personal strengths are set aside. And in my view, the real important thing to help us develop as an individual, flourish as an individual, and also how to convert this, move this onto how businesses flourish, how teams get to work together again, is all about paying attention to what the strengths and energizers are for individuals and the team as a whole. So, thank you. And so my top tips then, following on from what I've been saying, think about your strengths, and particularly when you may find that you have just had a bit of a down time. A lot of people tell me that they are swaying from really negative thoughts to positive thoughts in a day, half a day even, because of the range of things that have to be thought about at the moment. So try spend some time thinking about, what am I good at? When have I worked at my best? What makes me feel good? What makes me energized? And how can I do more of those things? And then also recognize my energy drainers. What really drains my energy, and what makes this happen, and how can I do it less? And thinking about what teams, how do I, in my team of people, bring out the best in others? And how do we collectively work together to make sure that we bring out the best for ourselves and to meet the intention, the intended objectives. And I'm suggesting that the balance of thinking about these things, 80-20 principle, again, to some extent, is because it kind of matches a tendency to, at current times, we've heard a lot of discussion about managing finances. And I for example, I'm a trustee of a charity where there's a big tendency, we naturally concerned about the finances of a charity. And some of the board members like to focus on what the money is doing, and this is important for businesses. Where are we going with our money? How are we knowing the details of our money, of the money, and how it's being spent? And what happens is that tends to be draining the energy of people who actually are more interested in going out, moving on, finding out what's going out there. What are the opportunities that we can create for ourselves? What ways do we need to change? How can I make things, how can I perform in a way which helps me to work at my best? So this is an approach which is useful for individuals and teams, but importantly, it's about helping businesses to rethink how to flourish and move on from a period of tendency to need to draw back and maintain resources. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Neil, and thank you for I was worried that we were going to be tight for time today, and we've got plenty of time for questions, so that's excellent.
Yeah, flash through quite a bit of mine, but yeah, I think it's better to leave time at the end for questions. And picking up on what you said before we started, I think because so many people access ChamberLIVE, not live now, but via its recording, whilst we have the benefit of a relatively small group of people, here in live attendance, it does provide an opportunity for a little bit of a platform discussion as well, which is perhaps quite good. So providing the washing machine's not going on the background and
we can hear it slightly
and all the rest of it, then we're probably all right to open it up to a little bit of discussion and questions.
Julie's got a question. Do you want to come in, Julie, with yours?
Yeah, I've got loads of questions actually, but I'm trying to focus on questions that might be helpful to everybody rather than just my own personal circumstances. It's to touch on something Catherine was talking about actually, and it's to do with recognising the energy drainers, and I'm sure we all can think about ones that bother us, but particularly at the moment there seems to be so much out of our control, Catherine. There are so many things happening that are way out of my own realm. So there's things about, what you can recognise what these factors are, how can you do them less, and how can you be exposed to them less, which makes you, more energised. But what do we do at the moment, Catherine, when there's so much out there that's way beyond our control? Have you got any tips there?
I guess this is it's about knowing those things, but also how do you phase them so that you give yourself limits, so that rather than perhaps thinking about it in a random kind of way, oh, I'll just listen to this. It's rather more thinking, okay, I'll do this over a particular period of time, or I know what kind of information is available when, or which events to listen to. It's making decisions about how to tune in to the different information that's around. So, and I really appreciate that there is an awful lot that pops up all over the place. And but it is a really difficult time at the moment to be able to kind of know how. I guess the other thing is also, what purpose is that information? How are you going to make use of it? So it's thinking about how do I use that information in ways that I can do something with. So that's one aspect of it. The other bit is yes, there are energy drainers, but yes, and you have to, and maybe some of those things you talked about you have to do, but the important thing is also, okay, so how are you balancing that by attending to things that actually help you, make you feel good? So where are the things, and to just think about that, and perhaps to list what are your key things that maybe.
I think there's an element of how to eat an elephant as well, isn't there? That don't feel that you need to take it all on in one hit, and just pick bits off at a time, bite-sized chunks.
It's about making decisions about what to do, rather than feel that it's allowing it to be overwhelming.
That's easier to do, I guess, when you're in the path of possibility. What if you're in there languishing on the path of limitation, and you common sense will tell you you need to do this, you need to do the other thing, but how do you switch paths into that more positive path in the first place?
Yes, that's right, and I agree that for some people that is a really difficult thing to be able to do. If that is not just their style for the current time, it is to do with a mood which is a longer lasting mood state that people are in. It is harder. Again, it is about realizing firstly that actually that is what's happening. Noticing that is the path, that is the one that you're in, the route that you're in, and recognizing that there is another way. So even noticing that is the case.
Catherine, I was also going to say it's perhaps having your own personal toolkit of things that you know have worked for you in the past, and to kind of work through some of those things, whether it's a case of listening to music during the course of the day, whether it's a case of going for a walk, whether it's a case of doing some other form of physical exercise, whether it's a case of changing the bed so it feels like you've achieved something to then set you up for the rest of the day. It's the little triggers that perhaps you need to work through various of them until you go, oh yeah, all of a sudden it's changed my state of mind. I'm in a better place than I was. And I think, touching on your slides from earlier on, I think I'm without question going through not so much good days and bad days, but good hours and bad hours. The transition between feeling fine and feeling rubbish is so narrow that I think it's pretty common at the moment, but equally it gives you an opportunity to switch back into positivity, hopefully that bit more readily.
Yes, that's right. And coming back to the decision making decisions, it is about recognizing that's what's happening. Stop, think, do something. It's realizing when that is the case, stop, think, and do something that's different.
I think the question that you'd fired, Jen, about that wheel, I think it's a really useful tool to use with colleagues or family or friends for that matter. But I think if you complete it honestly, you could almost produce a different output every hour of every day. Because at any given point you will feel different.
Yeah, thanks, Neil, for pointing that out. Yes, that's right. And in fact, yes, you just need, when you're thinking about this kind of wheel, or just thinking about how you are at the moment, actually that really just changes. That changes all the time. And so yes, you need to think about, I'm doing this in a particular point in time. I'm doing it in relation to thinking about work. I'm doing it in relation to thinking about my family. I'm doing it in relation to something else. And that slightly changes the way in which you address this.
And I think, it's about making small changes, isn't it? I mean, the example I've used in the past when talking about the expenditure summary from a financial health perspective, it's just because you drive past Starbucks twice a day to and from work doesn't mean you need to stop there. And so, when you look at how we were perhaps spending money 2-3 months ago compared to how we're spending money now, which bits of old expenditure do you want to carry forward into new expenditure? Have there been cost savings that you've made on things that you don't need? We're all in t-shirts and whatever. You don't need your finery on all the time, do you? There are so many positives, I think, that come out of this opportunity going forward. But yeah, making small differences that can it's the Dale Brailsford cycling marginal gains thing. It's the aggregation of little differences that make a big difference. And again, simply going back to the financial planning side, when you look at the cash flow modelling tools that we have, a really small input difference projected over the next 20-30 years can make massive differences and open up much more choice. And financial planning in particular is about giving yourself choice. It's whether you choose to travel around the world, or whether you choose to not travel around the world and have nice house. It's opening up to what you want. And yeah, everybody's different.
Can I bring Julia back in? She's got another question.
Yes, this one's probably more for Neil. I don't know about everybody else who's listening to this, but I've always found the thought of financial planning absolutely overwhelming. I have no idea where to begin. And I think because it's such a massive area, I think I need to carve out so much time to even sit down and start thinking. If you've just touched on before, Neil, maybe just do a little bit, or just pick one little bit and tackle that first. But if you get any tips for someone like me that I've just got a massive block on any kind of financial planning, because it just seems like I don't know what I'm doing. Do I need a financial advisor? And what are the tips for overcoming that kind of, I'm overwhelmed with this?
You don't need a financial advisor, but a financial advisor can add value in the same way that, everybody in this meeting, you don't need anybody, but everybody provides a value to their clients by understanding what they require and being able to deliver, a slight shift in direction of what you do. So without question, the hints and tips part of it will definitely start with: do your expenditure summary, compare that against what the income is that you have. Look at if there's a shortfall in income, then clearly something needs to be addressed. You need to speak to creditors and a whole host of other things, but put your hand up early. If there is hopefully a surplus, then it's very much that rule of thirds. Spend a third because you were doing, save a third, put it to one side for a rainy day, and then invest a third, and do that intelligently by using the most tax efficient options that are open to you, which almost invariably is pension. But yeah, it's little differences. But then thereafter, and again, where the value of advice comes in, or the value of all of us, is that rather than just taking advice on a transactional basis, you want it to be there with you all the time. You want somebody to continue to say, right, well, you made these changes last year, this is the benefit of that, these are the changes you need to make for this next year. And so again, because I've always got an analogy in my head, it's the equivalent of taking a long pot on a 12-foot snooker table. If you hit it once and then just leave it to go, then it's almost invariably going to miss the target. But if you can stop it and keep changing its direction every step along the way to the pocket, it will fall in the pocket. It's just a case of making those adjustments, and that's where the SatNav analogy came in. In fact, I would lay claim to Andy Henderson and his Success GPS stealing my SatNav analogy. But anyway, I'll let that go.
I'm sure he won't mind that. I'm not playing snooker with you, though, Neil, if that's how you play snooker. That's a clear breach of the snooker rules.
Yeah, I need 3 cues. Like two to point it towards the pocket, and then straight, away you go.
Mike's raised his hand. Mike, do you want to unmute and put your question?
Yeah, it's a question for Catherine, really. It's a fairly simple one. What makes people queue outside IKEA for 3 or 4 hours?
Well, that's yes, a behaviour question. Yeah, I'm sure there's all sorts of reasons. Goodness knows, I do not understand that. It's not behaviour I can follow. I can understand. So, no, I don't know. But people must like the idea of that, and must feel that they get some benefit from it, and that's all that I can say.
It's the 99p hot dog, isn't it? I think that there's a sort of herd mentality of us just wanting to return to something that we used to do and be around people in perhaps a big space. It's a really odd one, isn't it?
Yes, in a way, it's about kind of perhaps almost testing the rules. How can I get? How near can I get to this now? And so on. But yes, maybe it is just about being in contact with people and doing ordinary things. And if spending money is what you need to do, I guess if people haven't had a few months of spending too much money, maybe they've built a little surplus, and maybe it's time to like to spend a little on something that they've not been able to do for a while.
Julia.
So, conscious of time before Julia's other question comes in. Yeah, anybody who wants an expenditure summary sent through, anybody who wants me to run the attitude to risk questionnaire so you understand what your appropriate asset allocation could be or should be for pension or investments, just pick up with me separately, and yeah, more than happy to help with that.
And there's one question from Jen, which is about wanting to...
That was about colleagues completing the wheel,
right,
wasn't it?
Yes,
yeah,
right.
what I was thinking of was in terms of the chamber team, we've been wondering about whether to do we have a weekly staff meeting, and we've been wondering about whether to do a mindfulness, wellness kind of meditational session within it, because we've got some of the team on furlough and obviously the rest of us are working from home. And I was just trying to align that wheel that you showed to that group of people, and wondering whether you would advise that they fill it in for their own insight and then keep it confidential, or actually share them in advance so that we can all see where each other are.
Well, I guess it's...
And also, would you like to facilitate that session?
Yes, thank you. But yes, but the idea is, yeah, but most clearly it's personal material, and so people would need to consent to any sharing. But it's how it is, as we discussed earlier. It's about how you feel at the time that you complete it and how you're thinking about it. So it's actually the discussion that matters, rather necessarily even than what you've scored. It's how you came about it, what you think about it, and how you have the discussion that is just a way of engaging people. And it helps people to think about their circumstances, how things have been for them over the past few months, particularly for people who've been away from work, not so much in contact with their colleagues, and a way of bringing people back together. So it's a good way of sharing, but I'm happy to have a chat with you about how to do that.
Thank you.
Julia, were you coming back on IKEA?
No.
No, good.
It's Neil. Neil, how much time do you spend on your own financial planning?
Great question.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. There's some noise in the background. Yeah, it's a really good point, because it is genuinely, it's the equivalent of, you know, the plumber having a leaky tap at home, or the painter and decorator not having decorated for years. Not as much as I should do. It's much easier to do as I say, not as I do. But having said that, I am in much better control now than I was. I've quite enjoyed the reduction in spending and the opportunity that that's provided to, you know, look forward into what I want to do going forward and what I don't. So, you know, I'm a little bit of a fashion victim, and so I'm definitely quite keen to spend a bit less than I have done in the past, and I have taken the opportunity of you know, a little bit of enforced downtime to review and look at how my pension monies are invested, and just make one or two fine adjustments. So yeah, I perhaps don't spend as much time on it as I should, but if I have my own financial advisor, no, I think that it's the accountability. I think sometimes having somebody who's asking the question, what have you done? How have you planned? What differences, what changes have you made, and what have the benefits of those changes been? I think, yeah, the accountability can be quite good. I think financial advice, there was an American study by a company called Vanguard a few years ago that said that having a financial advisor can present about 4% a year of potential extra return in a multitude of different ways, by using different tax treatments, different, almost that from an educational perspective of encouraging somebody not to panic when there's a market downturn. Don't take your money out when things have dipped, because you'll never benefit from when they go back up again. If you look at the current situation, at worst, the markets were almost a third down on where they'd been, and yet now they're roughly 10% down on where they were. So anybody who overreacted and went, pull the money out, has missed out on subsequent recovery. And the residual, the remaining recovery that's required, we'll probably see within the next 6-9 months.
Yes, I think that's right. It's a good example of the kind of whether the behaviour psychology. So sometimes you need to do things which seem to be counterintuitive in order to work in the longer term.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for all your questions as well. I'll disclose my vice. It's not IKEA, it's McDonald's, and I'm torn because McDonald's in Burnley reopened yesterday. The queues were huge, and I don't eat. I drive through and I get a £1.39 white coffee, which actually, to say it's coming from a fast food joint, is actually good coffee. Now, I know from the last 3 months, I've realised just how much money I was spending on McDonald's coffee over, dropping in every day maybe. So that very much gives me that extra money to invest on some of Neil's advice. But that coffee drags me some days from the path of limitation into the path of possibility. It's my reward, it's my treat. So I'm just currently wrestling with how often I reintroduce that particular bad habit of mine. I haven't been yet, so I'm holding on.
I think there's another valid point there, because I think we all need our little safe place, don't we? So sometimes the safe place is, removing yourself from the working environment or the colleagues that surround you and nipping into Starbucks just to have, a change of scenery. Admittedly comes with resultant cost, but if that's your safe place from a mental health perspective, if that provides that transition that gets you onto positivity rather than negativity, then, well, what price of coffee?
Maybe you should trade down your Starbucks to a McDonald's, Neil. I recommend them. They're good.
Well, and also, Sam, and it's hardly like you've got a 300 quid a day Coke habit. We're talking £1.30 coffee. I think you're all right.
I know I've got a house to buy. Anyway, thank you so much, everybody, for joining ChamberLIVE. We will we'll publish the video on YouTube and share it on LinkedIn. I'm going to tag every one of you in it today, so that you can share and comment for us and spread the good news and the sensible teachings of Neil and Catherine far and wide for us. And a quick reminder: next week's ChamberLIVE update on the furlough scheme, the formal name of which has escaped me, but Neil will chip in now and remind me what it's actually formally called.
No,
the job retention scheme. That's it. The coronavirus job retention scheme. The update on that will be next Wednesday, and all our future webinars at chamberlive.co.uk. Have a wonderful Wednesday and enjoy the rain, everybody.
Thanks,
Take care. Thank you.
Pleasure to be involved.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Bye.